Red Bluff Station, Montana Territory. August 15, 1882. No man wants me. The words echoed in Sarah Whitecloud's mind as her boots touched the wooden platform of Red Bluff Station. The train behind her hissed and groaned, expelling steam into the late afternoon air. Dust swirled in golden clouds, catching the sunlight that poured through the gaps in the station's tin roof. She stood 6 feet and 5 inches tall, her broad shoulders draped in a blue cotton dress she had sewn herself from 3 yards of fabric because nothing ready-made would fit her frame. The dress pulled tight across her back with every breath. In her right hand she gripped a leather suitcase so old the handle had worn smooth. Inside 2 changes of clothes, a woolen blanket with holes, a cracked photograph of her parents, and $4.25. Everything she owned in the world. Sarah was 27 years old. She had heard those words 42 times in her life. No man wants you. No man could want you. You are too tall, too broad, too strong, too wrong. The Apaches at White Mountain Reservation had whispered it when she walked past. The Mexican women in the mission had said it to her face. And Thomas Wright, the man who married her when she was 19, had screamed it on their wedding night before turning his back and never touching her again. But Marcus Reed had written to her. 6 months of letters. Careful, proper letters that spoke of a home in Montana, a general store, a future. He had never mentioned love, but he had mentioned belonging, a place, a purpose. And for a woman who had spent 27 years being told she did not fit anywhere, those words had been enough. She scanned the crowd gathering at the platform. 40, maybe 50 people. Miners with dirt under their nails, ranchers in worn leather, women in pressed dresses holding the hands of children who pointed and stared. They all looked at her the same way people always looked at her, like she was something that should not exist. Then she saw him. Marcus Reed stood beneath a hand-painted sign that read, Reed's General Store. He was 5 feet 7 inches tall, shorter than Sarah by 10 full inches. His brown vest strained over a soft belly. His blond hair had been slicked back with pomade that was already melting in the heat. In his hands he held a bouquet of yellow roses wrapped in newspaper. Sarah's heart hammered. She forced herself to walk forward. Each step made her aware of her size, her feet huge in hand, sewn boots, her hands rough and large as any man's. Her face all hard angles and high cheekbones, skin the color of copper in firelight. She stopped 3 feet from Marcus Reed, close enough to see his eyes widen, close enough to watch his expression shift from surprise to disgust to rage in the space of a single breath. Mr. Reed, her voice came out smaller than she intended. I am Sarah Whitecloud. I received your letters. I am grateful for this opportunity. Marcus stared up at her, his mouth opened, closed, opened again. The roses trembled in his grip. You, he said slowly, are Sarah Whitecloud, the woman in the photograph. Yes, sir. The photograph was taken while I was seated. I did not intend to mislead you. Mislead? The word came out like a curse. Marcus's face flushed red from collar to hairline. Mislead, I ordered a bridewoman, a wife, not a freak of nature. The crowd began to gather closer. Sarah felt their eyes on her back, her shoulders, her 2 large hands still gripping the suitcase. I apologize if my appearance disappoints you, sir. I can return to Arizona if you provide the train fare. I have saved some money, but not quite enough for the full journey. Marcus threw the roses on the ground, yellow petals scattered in the dust. Return, return. He stepped up onto a wooden crate near the station wall, raising himself high enough that he no longer had to crane his neck to look at her. Folks, everybody listen here. The murmur of conversation died. Even the children stopped fidgeting. I paid good money to the Territorial Marriage Bureau, $50 for train fare. They promised me a healthy young woman capable of bearing children and keeping a Christian home. Marcus jabbed a finger at Sarah. Look what they sent me. A giant, a savage. This thing is broader in the shoulders than any man here. Look at those hands, those arms. "This is not a woman. This is God's mistake." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Not all of them, but enough. A middle-aged woman in a green dress stepped forward, circling Sarah like a buyer inspecting livestock. "How tall are you, girl?" Sarah swallowed the lump in her throat. 6 feet 5 inches, ma'am." "And your weight?" 210 pounds, ma'am." The woman clicked her tongue against her teeth. "Unnatural. Completely unnatural. No wonder nobody wanted you." Sarah's hands began to shake. The suitcase slipped from her fingers and hit the platform with a thud. The latch popped open. The photograph of her parents slid out, landing face down in a puddle of muddy water. She dropped to her knees, scrambling to retrieve it. The glass had cracked. Brown water seeped beneath the frame, obscuring the faces of the only 2 people who had ever looked at her with love. Her father, Charging Bear, had been a warrior. Her mother, Rosa, had been captured from a Mexican settlement and had chosen to stay with the Apache because Charging Bear treated her with kindness. They had both died in the Camp Grant massacre of 1871 when Sarah was 14 years old. He saw 144 Apaches slaughtered while they slept. Sarah had survived by hiding in a drainage ditch covered in blood and filth, listening to her mother scream her father's name. That was 16 years ago, and every day since Sarah had carried their photograph, the only proof that someone somewhere had once wanted her to exist. "Please," she whispered, trying to wipe the mud from the glass with the hem of her dress. "Please, not this." Marcus jumped down from his crate and strode over. He kicked the suitcase. Sarah's spare dress tumbled out into the dirt. "I am canceling this arrangement right now. Sheriff Thompson, you're my witness. I refuse to marry this creature." A fat man in a star-shaped badge nodded lazily. "Noted, Reed." Sarah looked up at Marcus, still on her knees, still clutching the ruined photograph. "Mr. Reed, I understand you are disappointed. But I did not deceive you intentionally. I only wanted a home. Please, if you could spare the fare for a return ticket, I will leave immediately. I will not trouble you further." Marcus laughed a sharp, ugly sound. "Return fare? I already spent $50 getting you here. You figure it out yourself, savage." Sarah pulled a small cloth pouch from her dress pocket and opened it with trembling fingers. $4 bills and 25 cents in coins. A train ticket to White Mountain Reservation cost $12. She was $8 short. She had no family there anyway. The reservation had made it clear years ago that a woman like her, too tall, too Apache for the whites, and too white for the Apache, did not belong. She had nowhere to go, no money to get there, nothing. The crowd began to disperse. Their entertainment concluded. A young boy no older than 7 picked up a stone and threw it. It hit Sarah's shoulder, not hard enough to hurt, but hard enough to sting. "Giant!" the boy shrieked. "Giant woman!" His mother did not stop him. Sarah sat on the wooden bench outside the station and pulled her knees up as far as her dress would allow. She pressed the wet photograph against her chest and closed her eyes. The sun beat down. The wind carried the smell of horses and coal smoke. Somewhere a dog barked. Life in Red Bluff went on, and Sarah White Cloud was invisible again. Worse than invisible. She was a spectacle people would talk about over dinner, a cautionary tale, a joke. She did not cry. She had learned long ago that crying only made people more uncomfortable. It made them angry. So she sat very still and very quiet, and waited for the sun to set, so she could figure out what to do in the dark. That was when she heard the footsteps, heavy boots on wood, slow, deliberate, coming toward her. Sarah kept her eyes closed. Whoever it was, they would pass. They always passed. But the footsteps stopped directly in front of her. "Ma'am." The voice was low, rough-edged like gravel scraped over iron. A man's voice. Sarah opened her eyes. He stood backlit by the setting sun, so for a moment all she could see was his silhouette. Tall, but not towering. Lean. A worn leather coat hung from his shoulders. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face. As her eyes adjusted, details emerged. Gray hair mixed with brown. A jaw covered in 3 days of stubble. Eyes the color of steel in winter. A scar ran down his left cheek, thin and white against sun-darkened skin. Nathaniel Brennan was 39 years old, though he looked older. Life had a way of aging a man when he spent 4 years punishing himself for sins he could never undo. "Ma'am," he said again, "do you have somewhere to go?" Sarah shook her head. She did not trust her voice. "Do you have money for a ticket home?" Another shake. Nate glanced back at the dispersing crowd, then at Marcus Reed, who was climbing into a carriage with exaggerated huffing motions, still complaining loudly to anyone who would listen. Nate's jaw tightened. 4 years ago, Nate had stood in almost this exact spot and watched his wife Catherine endure similar treatment. She had been Irish Catholic and poor. The good people of Red Bluff had made sure she knew she was not welcome. They had whispered when she walked past. They had refused to serve her in certain shops. And Nathaniel Brennan, young and scared and desperate to keep his job at the lumber mill, had said nothing. He had let them hurt her with their words because he was too much of a coward to stand up for the woman he loved. 6 months later, Catherine died in childbirth. Their son Michael died with her. Nate had been unable to get a doctor through a snowstorm. He had held Catherine's hand while she bled out on their bed, screaming his name, begging him to save her. And he could not. He had failed her twice. Once when she lived, and once when she died. Nate had spent 4 years believing he did not deserve a second chance. But looking at this woman, this stranger crumpled on a bench with a broken photograph pressed to her chest, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would not stand by and do nothing. Not again. "I have a ranch," Nate said. "Thunder Valley, 18 miles west of here. I need someone to help with the work, cooking, cleaning, mending. I can pay $10 a month plus room and board. When you save enough for a ticket, you're free to leave. No obligations." Sarah lifted her head. Her eyes black and deep as a well. At midnight searched his face for the trap. There was always a trap. "Why would you help me?" Nate looked down at his boots. "Because I didn't help the last person who needed me. And she died." The answer made no sense to Sarah, but the pain in his voice was real. She had heard enough false kindness in her life to recognize the truth when it appeared. "I can work hard," she said quietly. "I am strong. I will not complain." "I believe you." Nate bent down and picked up her suitcase. It was heavy, but he lifted it easily. Then he turned and began walking toward a wagon hitched to a gray horse at the far end of the platform. Sarah sat frozen for 5 full seconds. Then she stood, legs unsteady, and followed. The wagon ride from Red Bluff to Thunder Valley Ranch took 2 hours. The road was little more than packed dirt rutted by countless wheels and hooves. Mountains rose in the distance, purple against the darkening sky. The air smelled of sage and dust. For the first 20 minutes, neither of them spoke. Sarah sat on the wagon bench, hands folded in her lap, watching the landscape roll past. Nate kept his eyes on the road, the reins loose in his hands. Finally, he broke the silence. "Where are you from?" "White Mountain Apache Reservation, Arizona Territory." "Long way." "Yes, sir. 3 days by train." Nate nodded. "Why did you agree to the mail order arrangement?" Sarah was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible over the creak of the wagon wheels. "Because no man wanted me, sir. I tried 42 times, different men, different places. They all looked at me and walked away." Nate glanced at her. 42. Yes, I counted. And Reed was number 43. Yes. Nate turned his attention back to the road, but his hands tightened on the reins. "Reed is a fool." But so were the other 41. Sarah's head snapped toward him. In all her years, no one had ever said that. Everyone had always told her the fault was hers, her body, her blood, her existence. But this stranger, this man who owed her nothing, was saying the fault belonged to them. "Why do you think that, sir?" Nate took a moment before answering. "Because they only looked at the outside. They didn't see the person." "Do you see the person, sir?" "Not yet," Nate said honestly, "but I'm going to try." They arrived at Thunder Valley Ranch just as the sun disappeared behind the western hills. The sky turned violet, then indigo. Stars began to emerge scattered like thrown salt. The ranch sat in a shallow valley surrounded by low grass-covered hills. The house was a single-story structure built from rough-hewn logs, the gaps chinked with mud and straw. 3 rooms total. A sagging porch ran along the front. 50 yards away stood a barn with a leaning door and a corral fence that needed mending. Beyond that, a small vegetable garden, mostly dead from neglect. It was not much, but it was more than Sarah had expected. Nate pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down. He unhitched the horse with practiced efficiency, leading it to the barn. Sarah stepped down carefully, her boots sinking into the soft earth. The air here was cooler than in town, carrying the smell of grass and distant water. Nate returned and gestured toward the house. "Come on." Inside, he lit an oil lamp. Warm light filled the front room. A cast-iron stove sat against one wall, a wooden table with 2 chairs, a rocking chair in the corner. Everything was clean but sparse, no photographs, no decorations, the home of a man who had stopped living and merely survived. "Your room." Nate pointed to a door on the left side. "Mine's on the right. You can lock your door from the inside. I won't enter without permission." Sarah stepped into the small room, a narrow bed with a wool blanket, a window looking out toward the mountains, a wooden chair, a candle on a small table. It was the most privacy she had been offered in 3 years. "Thank you, Mr. Brennan. Call me Nate." "Yes, sir, Nate." Nate paused in the doorway. "We start at 5 in the morning. I'll show you the work. $10 a month, like I said. If you want to leave, give me a week's notice. I will work hard, I promise." "I know you will." Nate started to leave, then stopped. "Sarah, yes, you're safe here. Nobody's going to hurt you. Nobody's going to mock you. You understand." Sarah's throat tightened. She nodded because she could not speak. After Nate closed the door, Sarah sat on the bed. The mattress was thin but clean. She opened her suitcase and pulled out the photograph. The glass was cracked, the image water-stained, but she could still make out their faces, her father's proud smile, her mother's gentle eyes. She pressed the photograph to her chest and whispered in Apache, the language her father had taught her. "I found shelter, not home yet, but a beginning." That night, Sarah Whitecloud slept deeply for the first time in 3 months. No fear, no cold, no voices telling her she did not belong. Outside, the wind moved through the valley carrying the scent of coming autumn. Stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. And in a small ranch house in the Montana wilderness, 2 broken people rested under the same roof, neither yet knowing that they would save each other. But that knowledge would come, in time. Thunder Valley Ranch, Montana Territory, August 16th to August 31st, 1882, 2 weeks. Sarah woke at 4:30 in the morning, her body responding to rhythms learned over years at the reservation, where survival meant rising before the sun. Pale gray light seeped through the single window of her room. She lay still for a moment, listening to the silence. No coughing from the shared barracks, no babies crying, no whispered arguments in Apache or Spanish. Just the wind moving through the valley and the distant call of a bird she could not name. She rose and dressed in her brown work dress, the fabric worn soft from countless washings. Her fingers moved automatically through the familiar motions of braiding her long black hair, weaving it tight against her skull so it would not interfere with the day's labor. She splashed cold water from the basin on her face, gasping at the shock of it, then stepped quietly into the main room. Nate was already awake. He crouched before the cast-iron stove, feeding kindling into a small fire. The flames cast orange light across his weathered face, highlighting the scar on his cheek and the gray threading through his hair. He glanced up when she entered, surprise flickering across his features. "You're up early." "I am accustomed to it, Nate." He nodded and turned back to the stove. Within minutes, he had a pot of oatmeal bubbling over the heat. He ladled 2 portions into wooden bowls and pushed one across the table toward her. "Eat. The work is hard." They ate in silence. Sarah took small bites unused to having enough food to fill her stomach. At the reservation, meals had been rationed portions carefully measured to stretch supplies through the month. Here, Nate pushed a second bowl toward her without comment. "Eat more, you need your strength." After breakfast, Nate led her outside into the cool morning air. The sun had not yet crested the eastern hills, but the sky was lightening to pale blue. He walked her through the ranch, pointing out each task with economical gestures. Feed the chickens, collect eggs, milk the cows, chop firewood, clean the barn, wash clothes in the stream down the hill. This afternoon help me repair the south fence. The storm last month knocked down 30 yards of it. Sarah nodded at each instruction. "Yes, Nate. If you get tired, rest. Don't push yourself beyond your limits." "I will not get tired, Nate." He studied her face, seeing the determination in her dark eyes. A determination born not from strength, but from a lifetime of needing to prove her worth. He recognized it because he had worn the same expression for 4 years, working himself into exhaustion each day, so he would not have to think about Catherine's final screams. "All right, then," he said quietly. "Let's begin." Sarah worked like a woman possessed. She scattered grain for the 20 chickens, their soft clucking filling the morning air. She collected 14 warm eggs, cradling each one carefully in her large hands. The cows, 3 of them, stood placid as she milked them with surprising gentleness, despite her size. Her fingers, though thick and calloused, moved with practiced precision. The cows did not fear her. When she mucked out the barn, she lifted the shovel with ease, filling a wheelbarrow with 200 pounds of soiled hay and manure, then pushed it alone to the compost heap behind the garden. Nate, mending a harness in the barn doorway, watched her work. He had expected competence. What he witnessed was something more. She moved with an efficiency that spoke of years spent proving herself worthy of the space she occupied. By afternoon, the sun hung high and merciless. Nate led Sarah to the damaged fence on the southern border of his property. Wooden posts, each 7 feet tall, and weighing nearly 80 pounds, lay scattered where the storm had toppled them. "We need to set these back in the ground," Nate explained, pointing to the pre-dug holes spaced along the fence line. "Usually takes 2 men to lift them into place." Sarah said nothing. She walked to the nearest post, wrapped her arms around it, and lifted. Her shoulders strained against the fabric of her dress. A small sound escaped her throat, but she did not drop the post. Instead, she hoisted it onto her shoulder, carried it 15 feet to the waiting hole, and maneuvered it upright. Nate stood frozen, his jaw slack. He had needed help from 2 hired hands the last time he replaced posts, but Sarah alone handled it as if it were merely difficult rather than impossible. "How did you do that?" Sarah looked down at the ground, her cheeks darkening with shame. "I apologize if I seem too masculine, Nate. I know it is not proper for a woman to possess such strength." "No." Nate shook his head firmly. "I'm impressed. Keep going." They worked until sunset. Sarah set 15 posts. Nate hammered in the support beams and stretched wire between them. When they finished, both were drenched in sweat, their hands blistered and raw. The fence stood straight and strong, a testament to their combined effort. Nate surveyed their work and nodded slowly. "If I'd done this alone, it would have taken 3 days. With you, 1 afternoon." Sarah smiled. It was a small thing, barely a curve of her lips, but it was the first genuine smile she had offered since arriving in Montana. "Was I helpful then?" "Very helpful." That night, Sarah fell onto her bed, fully clothed, her body aching in ways she had almost forgotten. Muscles she had not used in months screamed for rest, but her heart felt lighter than it had in years. She had value. She was not a burden. For the first time since Thomas Wright had turned his back on their marriage bed, Sarah Whitecloud allowed herself to believe she might be useful to someone. The days blurred into a rhythm. Wake before dawn. Feed animals. Milk cows. Mend what was broken. Cook meals from the simple provisions in Nate's pantry. On the 5th day, Nate noticed small changes around the ranch, things he had not asked for, but appreciated nonetheless. His torn shirts, washed and mended, hung on pegs near the door. The vegetable garden, which he had neglected after Catherine's death, showed signs of recent weeding and watering. The floor of the main room swept clean of the dust that accumulated in the mountain air. And the meals. God, the meals. Sarah cooked with herbs he did not recognize, spices that must have come from her Apache heritage. The venison she roasted carried the scent of sage and something smoky that made his mouth water before he even sat down to eat. One afternoon Nate found her sitting by the well, her hair unbound. She ran a wooden comb through the thick black strands that fell nearly to her waist. Sunlight caught in her hair, revealing hints of deep blue like a raven's wing. She hummed softly a melody in a language he did not understand but found beautiful. Nate stopped walking. He stood 30 feet away, hidden partially by the barn, and simply watched. For the first time in 4 years, he felt something stir in his chest. Not guilt, not grief, something else. Something he had believed died with Catherine. Interest, curiosity, the faint stirring of desire. He shook his head and turned away, forcing himself back toward the work that needed doing. No, Catherine had been dead only 4 years. That was not enough time. And Sarah was here because she needed help, not because she wanted his attention. He would not abuse that trust. But his heart, it seemed, had stopped listening to his mind. On the 10th day, Sarah was splitting firewood behind the house. She had developed a rhythm, swinging the axe high and bringing it down with controlled force. The wood split cleanly most of the time, but on one swing her grip slipped. The blade glanced off the log at an angle and buried itself in her left foot. Blood bloomed instantly, soaking through her boot. Sarah cried out and collapsed, dropping the axe. Pain shot up her leg in white-hot waves. She pressed her hands against the wound, trying to stem the flow, but blood pulsed between her fingers. Nate was on the roof of the barn replacing shingles. He heard her scream and looked down in time to see her fall. He dropped his hammer and scrambled down the ladder, his heart hammering against his ribs. By the time he reached her, she was pale and shaking. "Let me see." He knelt beside her, his hands already moving to unlace her boot. "I am sorry, Nate. I was careless. I will be more careful next time. Quiet. Just let me look." He pulled off her boot. It was hand-sewn leather sized for a man, because no cobbler made women's shoes large enough for her feet. The gash was deep, running 2 inches across the top of her foot. Blood flowed steadily. Without hesitation, Nate scooped Sarah into his arms. She was heavy, solid muscle and bone, but he carried her. Adrenaline made him strong. He kicked open the door to the house and laid her on the kitchen table. "Don't look. This is going to hurt." He grabbed the bottle of whiskey he kept for medicinal purposes and poured it directly into the wound. Sarah screamed, her hands clenching the edge of the table so hard her knuckles went white. Nate worked quickly, threading a needle with practiced efficiency. He had sewn up gashes on horses on himself once, on a hired hand who'd been kicked by a mule. He could do this. 8 stitches later, he wrapped her foot in clean cloth torn from an old sheet. Sarah's face was wet with tears, but she had stopped crying out. She lay trembling on the table, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Nate pulled a chair close and sat down. Without thinking, he gathered her upper body into his arms, cradling her head against his chest. "You're safe now. It's done." Sarah wept. Not from the pain, though that was considerable. She wept because no one had cared for her like this. In so many years, she had almost forgotten what tenderness felt like. At the reservation, when she had been injured, people had shrugged and said she was strong enough to handle it herself. But Nate had dropped everything, carried her, stitched her wound, and now held her as if she were something precious. "I didn't know," she whispered against his shirt. "I didn't know it could be like this." "Like what?" "Someone caring if I was hurt." Nate's arms tightened around her. "I won't let you be hurt again. I promise." That night, Nate dragged his rocking chair into Sarah's room and positioned it beside her bed. Every 2 hours he woke to check her bandage and give her water. At 3 in the morning, Sarah opened her eyes to find him sitting there, his head tilted back in uncomfortable sleep, his hand resting on the edge of her mattress. "Why are you so kind to me?" she whispered. His eyes opened. In the candlelight they looked more gray than steel, softer somehow. "Because you deserve kindness." No one else thought so. Then they were blind. Sarah managed a weak smile. "Are you not blind?" Nate was quiet for a long moment. Then, with an honesty that surprised them both, he said, "The first day I just saw someone who needed help, but now I'm starting to see more." "What do you see?" "A strong woman, a kind woman, a beautiful woman." Sarah's eyes widened. "Beautiful me." Nate nodded. "I don't lie, Sarah." It was the first time he had used her name without the formal distance of ma'am or miss. Just Sarah, simple and direct and intimate. Her heart stuttered in her chest. 2 days later, Sarah's foot had healed enough for her to walk with only a slight limp. They sat together in the evening, the fire crackling in the stove, the darkness pressing against the windows. Nate had been quiet all day, wrestling with something internal. Finally he spoke. "I owe you an explanation. About what I said at the train station. About the person I didn't help." Sarah set down her sewing and gave him her full attention. Nate stared into the fire as he talked. "Her name was Catherine. She was from Ireland, came to America in 1875. I met her in Denver. She worked in a restaurant. Small woman, red hair, green eyes. I loved her the moment I saw her." He paused, gathering the strength to continue. "We married in 1876, moved here, built this ranch. But people in Red Bluff didn't accept her. She was Irish, Catholic. They called her inferior, said she was bringing down the quality of the territory. I knew what they were saying. I heard the insults. But I was too weak to defend her. I was afraid of losing work, afraid of being shunned myself. So I stayed silent while they broke her spirit piece by piece." Sarah felt tears building, but said nothing, letting him speak. In 1878, she got pregnant. December came early that year. Heavy snow. She went into labor during a blizzard. I couldn't get the doctor. The road was completely blocked. She bled for 6 hours, screaming my name, begging me to save her. I couldn't. Our son Michael, he died too. I buried them both under that oak tree out there." He gestured toward the window. In the darkness, Sarah could just make out the massive silhouette of an ancient oak standing alone 50 yards from the house. "For 4 years I haven't touched another woman, haven't smiled, haven't done anything but work myself into the ground, punishing myself for being too cowardly when it mattered. But when I saw you at that station being treated the way Catherine was treated, I knew I had a choice. Stand aside again or do what I should have done the first time." Nate turned to face Sarah directly. "You asked why I'm helping you. That's why. Because I failed Catherine. I won't fail you." Sarah's tears spilled over. "I am sorry about Catherine, about Michael." "You don't need to apologize. You just need to let me do this right. Let me protect you the way I should have protected her." Sarah reached out and placed her large hand over his smaller one. It was the first time she had voluntarily touched a man in 8 years. "You already did right. You saved me." Nate turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. Her hand dwarfed his, but the warmth was the same. "Maybe we're saving each other." They sat like that for a long time, hands joined, the fire burning low, 2 wounded souls beginning to recognize in each other the possibility of healing. But in Red Bluff, 18 miles east, Marcus Reed sat in a saloon drinking whiskey and nursing his humiliation. Across from him sat a large man with a broken nose and eyes like chips of flint. "So you want me to bring her back?" the man asked. Marcus nodded, his words slurring slightly. "That savage made a fool of me. Contract said she'd marry me. She owes me." The man leaned back in his chair. "Name's Jake Stone. I retrieve property. $500. That's steep. I'm good at what I do. You want her or not?" Marcus thought about his debts, about the money he owed to Big Tom Grady from the gambling hall, $3,000. If he could sell Sarah to the labor camps in Canada like Grady suggested, he could pay off at least a third of it. and Jake Stone looked like a man who would not be stopped by one rancher with a conscience. 500, Marcus agreed. Half now half when you deliver her. Jake Stone smiled, revealing yellowed teeth. She at Brennan's ranch, Thunder Valley, 18 miles west. I'll have her within a week. On the last day of August, as the sun set over Thunder Valley Ranch, Nate and Sarah sat together on the porch steps. The day's work was done. The animals were fed. The evening air carried the first hints of autumn's chill. Nate had been holding something inside all day, words that demanded to be spoken. He turned to Sarah, his heart pounding like a young man's, though he was nearly 40. "Sarah, I want to ask you something." She looked at him, her dark eyes reflecting the orange sky. "Yes. Would you consider staying not just as hired help, but as part of this place, part of my life, with me?" Sarah's breath caught. "You want me to stay truly? I don't just want it. I need it. These 2 weeks having you here, it's reminded me what it feels like to be alive instead of just existing." Tears streamed down Sarah's face, but she was smiling. "I will stay, for as long as you want me. Forever, if you'll have me." Nate leaned forward. Sarah met him halfway, their lips touched, gentle and uncertain. Two people who had forgotten what it meant to be wanted, learning the language of affection all over again. The kiss was chaste, barely more than a brush of contact, but it carried the weight of promises neither was quite ready to speak aloud. When they pulled apart, Sarah rested her forehead against Nate's, her hand on his chest, feeling his heart beat strong and steady beneath her palm. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me. Thank you for letting me." They sat together as the stars emerged one by one until the sky was thick with light. Neither of them noticed the three riders who sat on the ridge a mile to the east, watching the ranch through a brass telescope. Jake Stone lowered the scope and nodded to his men. "That's her. Big as a damn house. We take her tomorrow night. Brennan will be asleep. Easy work." The storm was coming. But for tonight, Sarah Whitecloud and Nathaniel Brennan allowed themselves to believe just for a few hours that happiness might be possible. Tomorrow would bring its own trials. Tonight, they had each other. And for now, that was enough. Thunder Valley Ranch, Montana Territory, September 1st to September 5th, 1882. 5 days. Sarah woke to sunlight streaming through her window and the memory of a kiss still warm on her lips. She lay perfectly still, afraid that movement might shatter the fragile joy blooming in her chest. 27 years of rejection, and now this. A man who looked at her and saw not a freak but a woman. A man whose calloused hands had held hers with tenderness she had believed existed only in stories. She rose and dressed with unusual care, choosing the red dress she had sewn from fabric Nate had purchased on their last trip to town. Red. A color she had never worn before because it drew attention, and attention had always meant mockery. But today she wanted Nate to notice her. She wanted to be seen. When she emerged from her room, the smell of frying bacon filled the small house. Nate stood at the stove, his back to her, his movements practiced and efficient. He must have heard her footsteps because he turned, and when he saw her in the red dress, something shifted in his expression. His eyes widened, his lips parted slightly. For 3 full seconds, he simply stared. "Good morning, Sarah." Not ma'am, not miss, just Sarah, spoken like a prayer. "Good morning, Nate." They ate breakfast together, but the easy silence of previous mornings had transformed into something charged with awareness. Their eyes met across the table, held, looked away, met again. When Nate passed her the salt, their fingers brushed, and Sarah felt heat rush up her arm. After they cleared the dishes, Nate cleared his throat. "Tonight I want to talk about the future, about what we want this to be." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. "I would like that." "Good. That's good." He reached across the table and squeezed her hand once quickly before standing. "I need to go into town this afternoon, buy wire for the north fence." "Will you come with me?" Sarah hesitated. Red Bluff meant Marcus Reed. It meant the people who had laughed at her, but Nate was asking, and she would not hide forever. "Yes, I will come." They rode into Red Bluff just after 2 in the afternoon, the wagon rattling over the familiar rutted road. Sarah wore her red dress and had braided her hair with a blue ribbon Nate had given her that morning without explanation. As they entered the main street, conversation stopped. Heads turned. A woman clutched her daughter's hand and hurried across the street to avoid passing too close. But this time Sarah did not shrink. She sat tall beside Nate. Her chin lifted, her hand resting visibly on his arm. An elderly woman in black stepped directly into their path, forcing Nate to pull the wagon to a halt. Mrs. Harlow, the minister's widow, a woman whose tongue was sharper than her late husband's Sunday sermons. "Brennan, where are you taking that creature?" Nate's jaw tightened, but his voice remained level. "Mrs. Harlow, this is Sarah Whitecloud. She lives at my ranch, and you will not call her a creature. Lives at your ranch, unmarried, that is fornication and sin." A crowd began to gather, drawn by the promise of scandal. Sarah felt her courage wavering, but Nate stood up in the wagon, making himself visible to everyone on the street. "We are not married yet," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the afternoon air. "But we will be." The crowd erupted in gasps and whispers. Sarah's mouth fell open. They had kissed once. They had made no formal promises. Yet here was Nate declaring his intentions to the entire town as if it were already decided. Mrs. Harlow's face turned purple. "Have you lost your mind? She is twice your size. You will be the laughingstock of the territory." Nate looked down at the old woman with something like pity. "I do not care what people say. Catherine died because I was too weak to defend her against talk like yours. I will not make that mistake again." He turned to Sarah, and in front of 50, watching eyes, he asked, "Sarah Whitecloud, will you marry me?" Sarah stood rising to her full height. She towered over everyone in the street, this giant woman in a red dress, and for the first time in her life, she felt no shame about it. "Yes, Nate, I will." Nate pulled her close and kissed her right there in the middle of Red Bluff's main thoroughfare. Some people clapped. Most stood silent, their faces ranging from shock to disgust. But Sarah heard none of it. She felt only Nate's lips on hers, his hands steady on her waist, his absolute certainty that she was worth defending. When they pulled apart, Nate helped Sarah down from the wagon. They walked hand in hand to the general store, bought the wire they needed, and left town with their heads high. Behind them, the whispers spread like wildfire. By evening, everyone within 20 miles would know that Nathaniel Brennan, the quiet rancher who had buried his wife and son 4 years ago, was marrying the giant Apache woman Marcus Reed had rejected. But before they returned to the ranch, Nate guided the wagon down a narrow dirt road that led away from town. 5 miles later, they stopped in front of a small white house with a neat garden and lace curtains in the windows. "Where are we?" Sarah asked. "My mother's house. She needs to meet you." Sarah's stomach dropped. "Now today. No time like the present." Helen Brennan answered the door wearing a flour-dusted apron and a suspicious expression. She was 5 feet 1 inch tall, white-haired, and had eyes the same steel gray as her son's. Those eyes traveled up Sarah's frame, taking in every inch of her height and breadth. "So this is the bride?" "Yes, Mother. This is Sarah Whitecloud." "Sarah, my mother, Helen Brennan." Sarah curtsied awkwardly, unused to the gesture. "It is an honor to meet you, Mrs. Brennan." Helen said nothing for a long moment, then she stepped aside. "Come in. I will make tea." The house was impeccably neat, every surface polished, every cushion perfectly placed. Sarah perched on the edge of a delicate chair that creaked ominously under her weight. Nate sat across from her, his expression carefully neutral. Helen returned with tea in china cups so fragile Sarah was terrified to hold one. The older woman settled into her own chair and studied Sarah with unblinking intensity. "You are very tall." "Yes, ma'am. 6 feet 5 inches. That is not natural for a woman." Sarah looked down at her hands, the familiar shame creeping back. "No, ma'am. I apologize. Do not apologize for what God made you. Helen's voice was sharp. I did not say it was wrong. I said it was unusual. There is a difference. Sarah glanced up, surprised. Helen turned to her son. Do you love her, Nathaniel? Yes. Truly, or because she reminds you of Catherine, another outcast you can rescue. The question hit like a physical blow. Nate's face went pale. Sarah felt her breath catch. Was that all this was? Not love, but guilt-seeking absolution. Nate looked at Sarah, really looked at her, and when he spoke his voice shook slightly. Maybe at first there was some of that. When I saw her at the station, yes, I thought of Catherine, but that is not why I love her now. Then why? Because Sarah makes me want to live again instead of just surviving. Because she is strong and kind, and she sees the best in me even when I cannot see it myself. Because when I look at her, I do not see someone I need to save. I see the person who is saving me. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Helen watched her son for a long time, then nodded slowly. Very well. But if you marry her, you must protect her, Nathaniel. The world will not be kind, you know this. I know, and I am ready this time. Helen turned to Sarah. Can you make him happy? I will try with everything I have, ma'am. Then you have my blessing, conditional as it may be. As they rode back to Thunder Valley, Sarah was quiet. Nate glanced at her several times before speaking. You are worried about what my mother said, about whether I love you or just the idea of redemption. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. I cannot blame you for doubting, but Sarah, look at me. She turned. In the fading afternoon light, his face was open, vulnerable. I have spent 4 years punishing myself. If all I wanted was to ease my guilt, I could have helped you and sent you on your way. But I asked you to stay. I asked you to marry me, not because of Catherine, because of you, because you make me feel things I thought died with her. What things? Hope, joy, desire. He took her hand. Love, Sarah, real love. Not obligation, not guilt, love. Sarah squeezed his hand, her large fingers enfolding his completely. I love you too. I did not know I could, but I do. They rode the rest of the way home in companionable silence, but Sarah's mind was not quiet. Tonight, Nate wanted to talk about the future. She knew what that meant. She had been married before to Thomas Wright, but that wedding night had been a disaster. Thomas had looked at her body with revulsion, declared her defective, and refused to touch her. The marriage had been annulled after 2 months. For 8 years, Sarah had believed she was broken, too masculine, too large, incapable of being a real wife. But Nate wanted her. She could see it in the way he looked at her, in the gentleness of his touch, in the kiss they had shared. And God help her, she wanted him too. But the fear remained. What if he saw her unclothed and changed his mind? What if her body disgusted him the way it had disgusted Thomas? That evening, after supper, after the dishes were washed and the animals bedded down, Sarah sat on the edge of her bed, trembling. She heard Nate's footsteps in the hall, a soft knock on her door. Sarah, may I come in? She opened the door. Nate stood there in his shirt sleeves, his hair damp from washing, his eyes filled with warmth and something deeper. Want. You are afraid, he said quietly. I can see it. Sarah nodded, unable to speak. Nate stepped inside and closed the door behind him. He sat on the bed beside her, careful to leave space between them. What frightens you? I am afraid that when you see me, truly see me without clothes, you will not want me any more. Why would you think that? The story poured out of her. Thomas Wright. The wedding night. His disgust. His words. You are not a woman. You are a mistake of nature. The annulment. The years of believing she was fundamentally defective. Nate listened without interrupting. When she finished, he took both her hands in his. Sarah, listen to me. I have seen you. Every day for 2 weeks I have watched you work. I have seen your strength, your body, the way you move. I am not disgusted. I am in awe. But I am not soft. I am not small. I am not like other women. Thank God for that. I do not want other women. I want you. He lifted one of her hands and pressed it against his chest over his heart. Feel that my heart is racing because I am nervous too. You are nervous. I have not been with a woman in 4 years. I barely remember what to do. I am terrified of hurting you or disappointing you. He managed a weak smile. So we are both afraid. Maybe we can be afraid together. Sarah felt something loosen in her chest. You truly want me, even though I am so different, especially because you are different. You are Sarah. That is all I need you to be. He leaned forward and kissed her, slower than the kiss in town, deeper. Sarah's hands found his shoulders, feeling the lean muscle beneath his shirt. Nate's fingers traced the line of her jaw, her neck gentle and exploratory. May I unlace your dress? He whispered against her lips. Sarah's breath hitched. Yes. Nate stood and moved behind her. His fingers worked the long row of buttons down her back, each one opening with a soft pop. The dress loosened. Sarah shrugged it off her shoulders, letting it pool around her waist. Beneath, she wore a simple white chemise that reached to mid-thigh. Stand up, Nate said softly. Let me see you. Sarah stood on shaking legs and let the dress fall completely. She turned to face him, still in her chemise and bloomers, her arms crossed protectively over her chest. Nate looked at her, just looked. His eyes traveled from her face down to her broad shoulders, her muscular arms, her full breasts straining against the thin cotton, her thick waist, her powerful legs. Sarah waited for the disgust, the rejection. Instead, Nate whispered, You are beautiful. I am too big, too strong. I look like a man. You look like a woman, a strong woman, my woman. He stepped closer, placing his hands on her shoulders. Sarah, I am going to undress now, too. Is that all right? She nodded, not trusting her voice. Nate removed his shirt, revealing a lean chest marked with old scars and the weathered skin of a man who worked outdoors. He was smaller than Sarah, his shoulders narrower, his arms less muscular. But Sarah did not see weakness. She saw the man she loved. He took her hand and placed it on his bare chest. Touch me, learn me, show me what you like, and I will do the same. Slowly, tentatively, Sarah ran her fingers over his skin, feeling the ridge of an old scar near his ribs, the steady thump of his heartbeat, the warmth of him. Nate closed his eyes and simply felt her touch, his breathing deepening. Now lie down, he said. Let me take care of you. Sarah lay back on the narrow bed, her body tense. Nate lay beside her, propped on one elbow. He kissed her forehead, her temple, the spot just below her ear. Sarah shivered. That is a sensitive place, he murmured. I will remember. His lips traveled down her neck across her collarbone. His hand rested on her stomach, warm through the thin chemise. May I touch you here? Yes. His hand slid lower over the curve of her hip, down to her thigh. Sarah's breath came faster. No one had ever touched her like this, with reverence, with desire. And here, his fingers traced the inside of her thigh feather light. Yes, please. Nate's hand moved higher, and Sarah gasped at the sensation. It was strange, overwhelming, but not painful, not shameful, just intense. Is this all right? Yes, it feels good, strange but good. Tell me if you want me to stop. Do not stop. Nate took his time learning her body's responses, discovering what made her gasp, what made her arch into his touch. Sarah had never felt anything like this. Thomas had never touched her. She had believed her body incapable of pleasure. But now sensation built inside her, coiling tighter and tighter until something broke open, and she cried out. Her hands fisting in the blanket, tears streaming down her face. Nate gathered her close, kissing her hair. Are you all right? Did I hurt you? Sarah shook her head, unable to speak. She was crying, but not from pain, from relief, from joy, from the overwhelming realization that her body was not broken. She was not defective. She was a woman capable of feeling everything a woman should feel. I never knew, she finally whispered. I never knew I could feel that. You deserve to feel that. You deserve all of it. He held her until her breathing steadied. Then quietly he asked, Do you want more? We can stop here if you prefer. Sarah looked into his eyes. I want all of you. I want to belong to you completely. What followed was tender and awkward and imperfect. Two people learning each other, fumbling, sometimes laughing nervously at their inexperience. But through it all, Nate kept his eyes on Sarah's face, watching for any sign of pain, murmuring constant reassurances. When they finally joined, Sarah tensed. But there was no pain, only fullness, only connection. Nate moved slowly, carefully, and Sarah moved with him, their bodies finding a rhythm that was theirs alone. I love you, Nate breathed against her neck. I love you. Sarah gasped, holding him tight enough that she feared she might hurt him, but he did not complain. When it ended, they lay tangled together, sweaty and breathless. Nate traced lazy circles on Sarah's shoulder. Sarah stared at the ceiling, marveling. Are you all right? Nate asked. I am more than all right. I am whole. For the first time in my life, I feel whole. Nate kissed her temple. You were always whole, Sarah. You just needed someone to show you. They fell asleep in each other's arms, Sarah's head on Nate's chest, his arm around her waist. Neither heard the soft footsteps outside the window. Neither saw the shadow of a man peering through the gap in the curtains before disappearing into the darkness. Jake Stone mounted his horse and rode back toward the ridge where his men waited. A smile played at his lips. Tomorrow night. Brennan would be exhausted after tonight's activities, distracted, easy to handle. The storm was here. But for one more night, Sarah White Cloud slept peacefully, wrapped in love and safety, unaware that her brief moment of happiness was about to be tested in ways she could not imagine. Tomorrow would bring violence. Tonight, she had joy, and that would have to be enough to sustain her through the darkness ahead. Thunder Valley Ranch, Montana Territory, September 6, 1882, Day of Reckoning. Sarah woke wrapped in warmth she had never known. Nate's arm lay across her waist, his breath steady against her bare shoulder. Sunlight crept through the window, painting golden stripes across the rough wooden floor. For the first time in 27 years, Sarah White Cloud woke without fear. She had been seen, touched, loved. She was whole. She turned carefully, not wanting to wake him, and studied his sleeping face. The lines around his eyes seemed softer this morning. The tension he carried in his jaw had eased. He looked younger, less haunted. Sarah reached up and traced the scar on his cheek with one fingertip. His eyes opened, gray as winter sky, but warm. Good morning, he whispered. Good morning. They lay there for a few minutes more, neither wanting to break the spell. But the ranch waited. Animals needed feeding. Work needed doing. Life continued even after the world had shifted on its axis. Nate kissed her forehead and rose, dressing quickly. Sarah watched him move about the small room, gathering his clothes, and felt a fierce surge of possessiveness. This man was hers. She would protect him with everything she had. The day passed in ordinary tasks, made extraordinary by new awareness. Every glance carried weight. Every accidental touch sent electricity through Sarah's nerves. When they worked side by side, repairing a broken stall door, their hands brushed and both paused, smiling like fools. At midday, Nate rode to the north pasture to check on the cattle. Sarah stayed behind to wash clothes in the stream that ran along the eastern edge of the property. She knelt on the flat rock, scrubbing Nate's shirts in the cold water, humming an Apache song her mother had taught her. The sun was warm on her back. Birds sang in the cottonwood trees. Everything felt peaceful. She did not hear the horses until they were almost upon her. Sarah looked up to see 3 riders approaching from the tree line. The man in the center sat tall in his saddle, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. As they drew closer, she saw the scar across his forehead, the yellowed teeth, the eyes that held no warmth. Jake Stone. Behind him rode 2 men Sarah did not recognize, both armed, both watching her with the predatory focus of hunters who had cornered their prey. Sarah stood slowly, water dripping from her hands. Her heart hammered, but she kept her face calm. This is private property. You are trespassing." Jake Stone smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "Sarah Whitecloud, you are coming with us." "I am not going anywhere." "See, that is where you are wrong." Jake dismounted, his boots hitting the ground with heavy thuds. "Marcus Reed paid for you, paid good money. Contract says you are his bride. You ran off with Brennan here instead. That is theft of property." "I am not property. Mr. Reed rejected me publicly. The arrangement was void." "Not how I see it. Not how the law sees it neither." Jake took a step closer. Sarah took a step back, her mind racing. Nate was half a mile away. She could scream, but would he hear? Could he get back in time? "Brennan will not let you take me," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Brennan is not here, and when he gets back, we will be long gone." Jake nodded to his men. "Take her." The two riders dismounted and advanced. Sarah looked around desperately. The stream was at her back. Trees to her left too far to reach. The house to her right, 200 yards across open ground. She ran. Her long legs carried her faster than the men expected. She heard cursing behind her, the thunder of boots on hard earth. She was 10 yards from the house when a hand grabbed her braid and yanked. Sarah's head snapped back. She fell hard, the breath knocked from her lungs. One of the men, a scarred brute with a missing front tooth, threw himself on top of her, pinning her arms. Sarah bucked and thrashed, her strength considerable, but he was heavy and had leverage. "Hold her still," Jake barked, approaching with a length of rope. Sarah opened her mouth to scream. The man clamped a filthy hand over her face, cutting off her air. She bit down hard. He howled and jerked back. Sarah rolled, throwing him off, and scrambled to her feet. Jake was on her in an instant. He was taller than her by 2 inches and outweighed her by 50 pounds, his fist connected with her jaw, snapping her head to the side. Stars exploded across her vision. She staggered, but did not fall. "Damn, she is tough," Jake muttered. "Good. Kane will pay extra for tough." Through the ringing in her ears, Sarah heard hoofbeats. A single rider coming fast. Nate. He must have heard the commotion, must have seen the horses from the ridge. He came at a full gallop, his rifle already in his hands. He pulled the horse to a sliding stop and dismounted before the animal had fully halted. "Get away from her!" His voice was cold, lethal. Jake turned his hand, dropping to the pistol at his hip. "This does not concern you, Brennan. The woman is Reed's property. She is my fiancée. Touch her again, and I will kill you. Big words for a dirt farmer." Nate raised the rifle, aiming directly at Jake's chest. "Leave, now, while you still can." Jake's 2 men had drawn their pistols. They pointed at Nate, 3 guns against 1. The air crackled with tension. Sarah could see the calculation in Jake's eyes. He was fast, she realized, probably faster than Nate. And he had numbers on his side, but Nate did not lower the rifle. His hands were steady. His eyes never wavered from Jake's face. "You kill me, my men kill you," Jake said. "Then they take the woman anyway. You accomplish nothing but dying." "Is she worth that?" "Yes," Nate said simply. The word hung in the air. Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. Yes, no hesitation, no doubt. She was worth dying for. Jake must have seen something in Nate's eyes that convinced him this was not a bluff. He held up a hand to his men. "Stand down, for now." "Smart choice," Nate said, though he did not lower the rifle. Jake mounted his horse, his men following suit. But before he turned to leave, he looked at Sarah. "This is not over, girl. Reed wants what he paid for, and I always deliver." They rode away, disappearing into the trees. Nate kept the rifle trained on them until they were out of sight. Only then did he lower it and turn to Sarah. She stood trembling, one hand pressed to her throbbing jaw. Blood trickled from a split in her lip. Nate crossed the distance between them in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. "Did they hurt you?" "Are you all right?" "I am fine, just shaken. They will come back. Tonight, tomorrow, soon. We need to be ready." He pulled away enough to look into her eyes. "Sarah, I need you to know something. If it comes to a fight, I will do whatever it takes to protect you. Do you understand whatever it takes? Sarah nodded. I will fight too. I am not helpless. I know. But promise me if I tell you to run, you run. Do not look back. Just go. I will not leave you. Sarah, please. She shook her head firmly. You stood by me when no one else would. I will stand by you now. We fight together or not at all. Nate looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Together, then. They spent the afternoon preparing. Nate brought out his other rifle, a shotgun, 2 pistols, and all the ammunition he owned. He showed Sarah how to load and fire each weapon. She learned quickly, her hands steady, despite the fear coiling in her stomach. They barricaded the doors with heavy furniture. Nate nailed planks across the windows, leaving narrow gaps to shoot through. They filled buckets with water in case of fire. By the time the sun began to set, Thunder Valley Ranch looked like a fortress. As darkness fell, they sat together at the kitchen table, eating a cold supper. Neither of them tasted. Nate reached across and took Sarah's hand. I am sorry, I brought this on you. If I had not taken you from the station, you would be safe. Safe? Sarah shook her head. I would be alone, homeless, probably dead by winter. You did not bring this on me. Marcus Reed did. And I do not regret one moment with you. Even if it ends badly, even then, 1 week of being loved is worth more than a lifetime of being invisible. Nate squeezed her hand. It is not going to end badly. We will get through this. And then we are going to get married, and we are going to grow old together right here in this house. I promise you that. Sarah smiled, though her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I am going to hold you to that promise, Nathaniel Brennan. They sat together as the last light faded, holding hands across the table, 2 people who had found each other against all odds, refusing to let go. The attack came at midnight. Sarah jerked awake at the sound of shattering glass. Nate was already moving, grabbing his rifle, pulling on his boots. Stay low. A flaming torch arced through the broken window, landing on the floor. Fire spread quickly across the dry wood. Nate stomped it out while Sarah grabbed the shotgun. Outside, voices shouted, horses whinnied, more glass shattered in the back room. They are trying to burn us out, Nate yelled. We need to get to the barn. More cover there. They burst through the front door into chaos. Jake Stone and his men had spread out around the house. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness. Bullets whined past Sarah's head. She ran for the barn, Nate close behind, both firing wildly to provide cover. They made it inside and slammed the heavy door shut. Nate dragged a water trough in front of it while Sarah climbed into the hayloft, the shotgun clutched in shaking hands. How many? She called down. 3, maybe 4, hard to tell in the dark. A bullet punched through the barn wall near Sarah's head. She flinched but did not move. Below, Nate fired through a gap in the door. Someone screamed. A body hit the ground. One down, Nate shouted. But the victory was short-lived. Flames appeared along the barn's western wall. They were setting fire to the whole structure. Smoke began to fill the space, thick and choking. We cannot stay here, Sarah coughed. The back door. We go on 3. Run for the house and barricade inside. Ready. Sarah climbed down from the loft. Ready. 1, 2, 3. They burst from the back door into the night. Sarah saw a figure moving to her left and fired the shotgun without thinking. The man went down, clutching his leg, screaming. She felt no satisfaction, only grim determination. They made it back to the burning house. The fire had spread to the roof, but the main room was still intact. Nate shoved furniture against the door while Sarah reloaded weapons with shaking hands. Sarah! Nate's voice was urgent. I need you to listen. There is a root cellar under the floor in my bedroom. Trapdoor under the bed. If they get through, you go down there and you do not come out until morning. I told you I am not leaving you. And I am telling you I need to know you are safe. Please, Sarah, please do this for me. Before she could answer, the front door exploded inward. Jake Stone stood silhouetted in the doorway, his face twisted with rage. Blood streamed from a wound on his arm. His remaining man crouched behind him. Enough of this, Jake roared. Reed wants you alive, girl, but he did not say unharmed. And Brennan, you are dead either way." He raised his pistol. Nate pushed Sarah behind him and fired. The bullet caught Jake in the shoulder, spinning him around. But Jake was tough. He stayed on his feet and returned fire. The bullet hit Nate in the side. He grunted and went down. "Nate!" Sarah dropped beside him, blood soaked through his shirt, hot and dark. "The cellar," he gasped. "Go now." "No." Jake was advancing, reloading as he walked. His man circled around, trying to flank them. Sarah looked at Nate, at the blood, at the men who wanted to take her and kill the only person who had ever loved her. Something inside her snapped. She stood, grabbed the axe Nate used for splitting wood, and charged. Jake fired. The bullet grazed her arm, but she did not slow. She swung the axe with all her strength. Jake barely dodged the blade whistling past his face. She swung again, driving him back with the fury of her assault. "Crazy bitch!" Jake stumbled over debris and fell. Sarah stood over him, the axe raised for a killing blow. "Stop, or he dies." She turned. Jake's man had Nate by the hair, a knife pressed to his throat. "Drop the axe, or I open him up." Sarah's hands shook. Nate's eyes met hers. He mouthed one word: run. She could not leave him. But if she did not drop the axe, they would kill him anyway. The standoff lasted 3 seconds. Then a gunshot cracked through the night. Jake's man dropped a hole through his head. He fell across Nate dead before he hit the ground. In the doorway stood Father O'Malley, the Catholic priest from Red Bluff, holding a smoking pistol in his liver-spotted hands. "I heard shooting from town," the old priest said calmly. "Thought you might need assistance." Jake Stone scrambled to his feet and ran, disappearing into the darkness, leaving his dead companion behind. Sarah did not chase him. She dropped the axe and fell beside Nate, her hands pressing against his wound. "Stay with me. Please, Nate, stay with me." Father O'Malley knelt beside them, his priestly robes dragging in the blood. "How bad is it?" "Bad," Nate wheezed, "but not fatal. Missed anything important." "We need to get you to a doctor," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "No time. You are going to have to stitch me up. You have steady hands." With Father O'Malley's help, they got Nate into the bedroom. Sarah worked by lamplight, her hands miraculously steady as she threaded the needle. She had stitched wounds before on the reservation, on animals, once on herself, but never on someone she loved. Nate gritted his teeth as she worked, his hand clenched around a leather strap. 12 stitches later, she tied off the thread and bandaged the wound with strips torn from a clean sheet. "You will live," Father O'Malley pronounced, "though you will be sore for weeks." Nate managed a weak smile. Small price to pay. Sarah collapsed beside the bed, adrenaline draining away, leaving her shaking and exhausted. Father O'Malley placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You are both very brave and very foolish. This is not over. Marcus Reed will send more men." "Let him," Sarah said, her voice hard. "We will be ready." Father O'Malley studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I believe you will. Now I am going to fetch the sheriff." Attempted murder on a rancher in his own home that even Sheriff Thompson cannot ignore. After the priest left, Sarah helped Nate drink water, then lay down beside him, carefully mindful of his wound. He wrapped his good arm around her. "You did not run," he said. "I told you I would not. You could have died. So could you. We are in this together, remember." Nate kissed her hair. "Together. Always." As dawn broke over Thunder Valley Ranch, painting the smoke-stained sky in shades of gold and pink, Sarah and Nathaniel Brennan lay holding each other amid the wreckage of their home. The barn was gone, just charred timbers and ash. The house was damaged but standing. One man dead in the yard, blood soaking into the earth. But they had survived. And more than that, they had fought for each other, proven that what they had was worth defending, worth risking everything for. Sarah looked at the ruins around them and felt no despair. They would rebuild, stronger this time, together. The war was not over. Jake Stone still lived. Marcus Reed still schemed. But Thunder Valley Ranch had weathered its first storm, and Sarah Whitecloud, the woman no man had wanted, had discovered she was more than just strong. She was a warrior, and warriors did not surrender. Thunder Valley Ranch and Red Bluff, Montana Territory, September 7th to September 9th, 1882. 3 days of reckoning. The morning sun found Sarah sitting on the porch steps, a rifle across her knees, watching the horizon for movement that did not come. Her left arm was bandaged where Jake Stone's bullet had grazed her. Her jaw was purple where his fist had landed, but her eyes were clear and alert. She had not slept. Neither had Nate, despite his wound. They had taken turns keeping watch through the night, trusting nothing and no one except each other. Father O'Malley returned at dawn, riding in a wagon alongside Sheriff Thomas Thompson, whose reluctance showed in every line of his fat face. Behind them came 2 deputies, and surprisingly, Helen Brennan, Nate's mother, her small frame rigid with fury. The sheriff surveyed the damage with obvious displeasure: the burned barn, the bullet-riddled house, the body in the yard now covered with a tarp. He heaved himself down from the wagon with a grunt. "Brennan, Miss Whitecloud, Father O'Malley says there was trouble." "Trouble?" Nate appeared in the doorway, leaning heavily against the frame, his shirt bandaged beneath fresh blood seeping through. "Jake Stone and 3 men tried to kill me and kidnap Sarah. I would call that more than trouble, Sheriff." Thompson squatted beside the covered body, lifted the tarp, and grimaced. "That is Clem Hodges, drifter, known horse thief. You kill him." "I did," Sarah said quietly. "He was going to burn us alive." The sheriff looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Self-defense, I suppose, though a woman shooting a man, even a bad one, that will cause talk." "Let them talk," Helen Brennan said sharply, stepping forward. "My son was defending his home and his intended wife. This woman saved his life. If there is talk, Sheriff, it had better be about how you allowed Marcus Reed to hire killers in the first place." Thompson flushed. "Now, Mrs. Brennan, I cannot control what private citizens do." "Marcus Reed paid Jake Stone $500 to abduct Sarah," Father O'Malley interjected. "I heard it myself at the saloon 2 days ago. I came to warn them, but I was too late. You need to arrest Reed, Sheriff, and find Jake Stone before he kills someone else." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "Reed is a prominent businessman. I cannot just arrest him on hearsay." "Then arrest him on my testimony," Nate said, pushing away from the doorframe despite Sarah's protest. "Jake Stone told me directly that Reed paid for Sarah. That makes Reed an accessory to attempted murder and kidnapping." Thompson looked around at the assembled witnesses, realizing he had no choice. "Fine. I will bring Reed in for questioning. But if this goes to trial, you folks better be prepared for what that means. Reed has money, lawyers. You have a dead body and a lot of accusations." "We have the truth," Sarah said. "Is that not enough?" The sheriff did not answer. 2 hours later, Marcus Reed sat in the Red Bluff jail, his face pale and slick with sweat. He had been arrested at his store, dragged through the main street in handcuffs, while half the town watched. His humiliation was complete. Nate and Sarah, accompanied by Father O'Malley and Helen Brennan, sat in the sheriff's office while Thompson conducted his interrogation in the next room. They could hear everything through the thin walls. "Mr. Reed, did you hire Jake Stone to retrieve Sarah Whitecloud?" A long pause. Then, "I paid him to retrieve property that was rightfully mine. She was contracted to marry me. She broke that contract." "You rejected her publicly, Mr. Reed. Multiple witnesses confirm that." I was emotional. I did not mean it. The contract was still valid." "So you hired a known criminal to kidnap her." "I hired him to bring her back so we could resolve the matter properly." "By burning down Brennan's ranch and shooting him." "I did not authorize violence. I told Stone to bring her back, unharmed." "You told a man who has killed 18 people that you wanted a woman brought to you against her will, and you expected no violence." The sheriff's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Mr. Reed, you are either a liar or a fool, possibly both." Sarah listened to Marcus's whimpering excuses and felt no satisfaction, only a hollow sadness. This pathetic man, drowning in debt and desperation, had nearly destroyed everything she had found with Nate. Not because he loved her, not because he even wanted her, but because his pride and his greed had twisted him into something monstrous. The interrogation continued for another hour. Eventually, Marcus broke down completely and confessed to everything. The debt to Big Tom Grady, the plan to sell Sarah to labor camps in Canada, Jake Stone's involvement, all of it spilled out in tearful, self-pitying detail. When Thompson finally emerged from the interrogation room, he looked tired. Reed will stand trial for conspiracy to commit kidnapping and attempted murder. Judge arrives next month. Until then, he stays in jail. And Jake Stone, Nate asked. We will put out notices. Wanted posters. He will turn up eventually. Men like that always do. But as they left the sheriff's office, Sarah felt no relief. Jake Stone was still out there, wounded, angry, and now with nothing to lose. He would come back. She knew it with the certainty of prey that has survived one attack and knows the predator still hunts. Nate must have sensed her thoughts because he took her hand as they walked to the wagon. We will be ready if he returns. I know, but I am tired of being afraid. Then let us give you something besides fear to think about. He stopped in the middle of the street in full view of the townspeople who had gathered to gawk and gossip. He turned to Father O'Malley, who walked behind them. Father, how long does it take to arrange a wedding? The old priest's eyebrows rose. In the Catholic Church, several weeks of preparation, bands to be read, instruction in the faith. I do not have several weeks. Can you do it faster? Father O'Malley looked at Sarah's bruised face, at Nate's blood-stained shirt, at the desperation in both their eyes to claim something good amid so much violence. He smiled. For you two, I think God will understand if we expedite the process. Tomorrow afternoon, Nate confirmed. He turned to Sarah. If you still want to marry a broken-down rancher with more scars than sense. Sarah laughed, the sound startling after days of fear and fighting. I want nothing more. Helen Brennan, who had been quiet throughout the morning, stepped forward. Then we have work to do. Sarah needs a proper dress, and you, Nathaniel, need to rest before you collapse. Come along, both of you. We are going to my house. The next 30 hours passed in a blur of activity that left Sarah dizzy. Helen Brennan, it turned out, was a force of nature when properly motivated. She took Sarah's measurements, pulled out a trunk of her own wedding clothes from 40 years prior, and began altering a cream-colored dress with astonishing speed and skill. My mother was a seamstress, Helen explained as she worked her needle flashing in the lamplight. She taught me well. This dress was made for a woman 5 feet tall, but we can add panels, let out the seams, extend the hem. It will not be fashionable, but it will be beautiful. Sarah watched the older woman work, overcome with emotion. Why are you doing this for me? Helen paused, her needle hovering above the fabric. Because my son loves you. Because you fought for him when you could have run. Because you make him happy, and I have not seen him happy since Catherine died. She looked up, her gray eyes fierce. And because any woman who can shoot a man dead to protect her home is a woman I want in my family. The dress was ready by noon on September 9th. Sarah stood in Helen's bedroom staring at herself in the mirror, hardly recognizing the woman who looked back. The cream fabric draped over her broad shoulders, fitted through the waist, then flowed to the floor. Helen had embroidered blue flowers along the neckline and cuffs, Apache patterns Sarah had described from memory. The dress was not small or delicate. It was made for a woman of Sarah's size, and it was stunning. You are beautiful, Helen said softly. Never let anyone tell you otherwise. Sarah turned, tears streaming down her face, and embraced the small woman who would soon be her mother. Thank you for everything. The wedding took place at 4 p.m. in Father O'Malley's small church on the edge of Red Bluff. The building was old, the wood silvered with age, the cross above the door carved by hand. Inside, the pews could hold perhaps 40 people. Only 12 were present. Helen Brennan sat in the front row, dressed in her best black silk. Beside her sat three women Sarah did not know, friends of Helen's, who had come out of respect for her. Behind them, four ranchers Nate had worked with over the years, men who valued loyalty and hard work over gossip. Father O'Malley stood at the altar, his vestments pressed his prayer book open. And at the front, beside the priest, stood Nathaniel Brennan. He wore a black suit borrowed from Father O'Malley, too large in the shoulders and too short in the sleeves, but brushed clean and presentable. His hair was slicked back, his face freshly shaved, revealing the full extent of his scar. He looked thin and worn and nervous, and when Sarah appeared in the doorway, the sun behind her turning her cream dress to gold, his face transformed with such joy that several people in the congregation gasped. Sarah walked down the aisle alone. She had no father to give her away, no family to stand beside her. But she did not feel alone. With each step she felt the weight of 27 years of rejection lifting away. By the time she reached Nate and took his hands in hers, she felt light enough to float. Father O'Malley spoke the ancient words. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of God to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." Sarah barely heard the rest. She looked into Nate's eyes and saw her future reflected there. A home, children, years of ordinary days made extraordinary by shared love, safety, belonging, everything she had been told she could never have. "Nathaniel Brennan, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live?" "I do." His voice was clear and strong. "Sarah Whitecloud, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live?" Sarah's voice shook, but her words were certain. "I do." "Then, by the power vested in me, by God and the territory of Montana, I pronounce you husband and wife. Nathaniel, you may kiss your bride." Nate stepped forward and cupped Sarah's face in his hands. The kiss was gentle, reverent, a promise sealed before God and witnesses. When they pulled apart, both had tears in their eyes. Father O'Malley smiled. "Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Nathaniel Brennan." The small congregation applauded. Helen Brennan wept openly. And Sarah, now Sarah Brennan, felt the final piece of her shattered heart click into place. They held a small reception in the churchyard. Helen had brought food, simple fare but plentiful. Bread and cheese and cold chicken and a cake she had stayed up all night baking. People ate and talked in quiet voices, still uncertain what to make of this unusual match, but willing to celebrate for Helen's sake, if not for Nate and Sarah's. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Nate drew Sarah away from the gathering. They walked to the edge of the yard where they could see the mountains in the distance. "Are you happy?" he asked. "More than I knew was possible. Even with everything that has happened, the attack, the fear, all of it," Sarah took his hand and pressed it to her heart. "Especially because of all of it. It showed me what we are willing to fight for, what we mean to each other. I would go through it all again if it meant ending here as your wife." Nate pulled her close, resting his head against her shoulder. "I love you, Sarah Brennan. I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." "I could never regret you, Nathaniel. You are the answer to prayers I was too afraid to speak." They stood together as the light faded, husband and wife, now bound by law and faith, and the kind of love that survives fire. Behind them, the celebration continued. Ahead of them, the road back to Thunder Valley Ranch, where they would rebuild what had been destroyed and create something new. But for this moment, they simply held each other and watched the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. The storm had passed. Jake Stone had vanished into the wilderness, either dead from his wounds or fled to some distant territory. Marcus Reed sat in jail awaiting a trial that would end with him losing everything. The danger had not disappeared entirely, but it had receded enough to let them breathe. Sarah Whitecloud, Now Sarah Brennan had survived 27 years of being unwanted. She had endured rejection, humiliation, violence, and loss. But she had also found something the other 42 men who rejected her would never have. She had found a man who saw her not as a mistake of nature, but as a miracle. And that made everything worthwhile. As they walked back to the wagon hand in hand, ready to begin their married life together, Sarah looked up at the vast Montana sky and whispered a prayer of gratitude in the Apache language her mother had taught her. She had come to this territory believing she was journeying toward one more rejection. Instead, she had found home, and she would fight to keep it for as long as she drew breath. The future was uncertain, but it was theirs, together, always. Thunder Valley Ranch, Montana Territory, September 1882 to June 1883, 9 months of building. The wagon rattled over the familiar road back to Thunder Valley Ranch as the sun dipped below the western mountains. Sarah sat close to Nate, her hand resting on his thigh, his arm around her shoulders. Mrs. Brennan. The name echoed in her mind like a bell resonating with disbelief and joy in equal measure. She was married, wanted, chosen. When they crested the final hill and the ranch came into view, Sarah's breath caught. The house stood damaged but defiant, its charred walls and broken windows testament to the battle they had survived. The barn was nothing but ash and blackened timber. The garden was trampled. Everything they had built together lay in ruins. Nate felt her stiffen beside him. "We will rebuild, stronger this time. It will take months, maybe a year. Then we have a year. We have time, Sarah. We have each other. That is all we need." They spent their wedding night in the least damaged room of the house, with blankets hung over the broken windows and a fire crackling in the salvage stove. It was not the romantic evening either had imagined, but when Nate took Sarah in his arms, when their bodies came together as husband and wife, the ruined walls around them ceased to matter. They had survived. They had won. And now they would build something permanent from the ashes. The next morning they began the work of restoration. Nate's wound was still healing, so the heavy labor fell to Sarah. She cleared debris, pulled down the sections of wall too damaged to save, and began salvaging usable timber. Neighbors arrived unexpectedly on the third day. 4 ranchers Nate had helped over the years, men who believed in repaying debts. They brought tools, lumber, and strong backs. By the end of September, the barn had a new frame. By October, the house had a patched roof and windows with real glass instead of blankets. The work was exhausting, but Sarah had never felt more alive. Every board she nailed, every stone she laid, was a declaration. This is mine. This is ours. You cannot take this from us. In early November, Sarah missed her monthly bleeding. She said nothing at first, afraid to hope, afraid to jinx the fragile possibility growing inside her. But by December, there was no denying it. Her breasts were tender, her stomach queasy in the mornings. She was pregnant. She chose to tell Nate on the winter solstice, the longest night of the year. They sat before the fire after supper, the rebuilt house warm and solid around them. Sarah took his hand and placed it on her still flat belly. "There is someone else living here now," she said quietly. Nate stared at her, his mind working to understand. When comprehension dawned, his face went white, then red, then crumpled with emotion. "You are certain?" "As certain as I can be. 3 months without bleeding. The sickness in the mornings. I have seen this in other women." Nate buried his face against her stomach, his shoulders shaking. Sarah held him, her own tears falling into his hair. She knew what he was thinking. Catherine, Michael, the blood and screaming and death. The guilt he had carried for 4 years. "I am afraid," he whispered against her. "What if I lose you too?" "You will not lose me. I am strong, Nate, stronger than Catherine was, and this time we will be prepared. We will have the doctor here weeks before my time. We will do everything right. Promise me you will fight to stay with me." I promise. I have fought too hard to get here. I will not leave you now." The winter passed slowly. Sarah's belly swelled, growing round and tight. She continued to work as long as she could, ignoring Nate's protests, until finally in March, the weight of the child made bending and lifting impossible. Then she turned to indoor tasks, sewing tiny clothes from scraps of fabric, knitting blankets with wool Helen Brennan provided. Helen visited often that winter, bringing food and wisdom earned from raising 3 children of her own. She taught Sarah what to expect, how to breathe through the pain, what signs meant danger, and what were normal. The 2 women grew close, bound by their shared love for Nate and their determination to see this child born healthy. In late May, 2 weeks before Sarah's due date, Dr. Margaret Hayes arrived at Thunder Valley Ranch. She was a stern woman of 50, one of the few female physicians in the territory, and she had delivered over 300 babies in her career. Nate had paid her handsomely to stay at the ranch until the birth was complete. "I will not lose another wife," he told her bluntly. "Whatever it costs, whatever you need, Sarah and the child must survive." Dr. Hayes had looked at him with something like pity. "I will do everything in my power, Mr. Brennan, but some things are in God's hands, not mine." Sarah went into labor on June 14, 1883, just after dawn. The pain started as a low ache in her back, then intensified into waves that stole her breath. Dr. Hayes examined her and pronounced everything normal. "First babies take time. Could be hours. Could be a full day. Try to rest between pains." But Sarah could not rest. She paced the bedroom, her hands pressed to her lower back, breathing through each contraction, the way Helen had taught her. Nate stayed with her, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool water, his own face gray with fear. The labor lasted 16 hours. As the sun set and the room filled with shadows, the pains became unbearable. Sarah screamed, unable to contain the sound any longer. Each contraction felt like her body was being torn in half. Dr. Hayes remained calm, her hands gentle but firm. "You are doing well. The baby is moving down. You are almost there." "I cannot do this," Sarah gasped. "It is too much." Nate gripped her hand so tightly she felt bones grind. "You can. You are the strongest person I know. Just a little more, Sarah, just a little more." At 10 minutes past 8 in the evening, with a final agonizing push, Sarah Brennan brought her son into the world. The baby's cry filled the room high and indignant. Dr. Hayes wrapped him in a clean blanket and placed him on Sarah's chest. He was enormous for a newborn, nearly 10 pounds, with a shock of black hair, and skin the color of honeyed bronze. He had Sarah's eyes dark and deep, and Nate's nose small and straight. "A son, Doctor," Hayes announced, smiling for the first time since her arrival. "Healthy lungs, all fingers and toes accounted for. Congratulations." Sarah looked down at the squalling infant and felt love so fierce it stole her remaining strength. This child, this impossible, beautiful child. Proof that her body was not defective, not broken. She could create life. She could be a mother. Nate leaned over them both, tears streaming down his face unchecked. "He is perfect, Sarah, he is absolutely perfect." "What shall we name him?" Sarah whispered, her voice hoarse from screaming. Nate was quiet for a long moment. Then, with a voice thick with emotion, he said, "Michael, if that is acceptable to you, for my first son." Sarah understood the weight of that name. The grief and hope bound together, the past and future meeting in this tiny, wriggling body. Michael Brennan, it is a good name. They spent that night as a family, the 3 of them curled together in the large bed Nate had built with his own hands. Michael nursed hungrily at Sarah's breast, his small fists kneading her skin. Nate watched them both with an expression of wonder, as if he could not quite believe they were real. "I thought I would never have this again," he said softly. "A wife, a child, a reason to hope. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for giving me back my life. You gave me mine first. We are even." The months that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and endless days. But Sarah had never been happier. Michael grew quickly, his appetite enormous, his temperament generally sweet unless he was hungry or wet. He had Sarah's size, already larger than other babies his age, and her strength. By 3 months, he could hold his head steady. By 6 months, he was trying to crawl. The ranch prospered. The new barn was larger than the old one, with room for twice as many animals. The house had an additional room, now a nursery, where Michael slept in a cradle Nate had carved from oak. The garden yielded more vegetables than they could eat, so Sarah traded the surplus in town for other goods. The townspeople's attitude toward them had shifted. Some still whispered and stared, but others had begun to show grudging respect. A woman who could fight off killers and birth a healthy child while standing 6 feet 5 inches tall was not someone to be dismissed lightly. And Nate's quiet dignity, his refusal to be ashamed of his wife, had won over more hearts than he knew. Marcus Reed's trial had taken place in November. He was found guilty of conspiracy to commit kidnapping and sentenced to 5 years in the territorial prison. His store was sold to pay his debts. By the time he was released, he would have nothing and no one. It was a fitting end for a man who had valued pride over decency. Jake Stone was never found. Some said he died of his wounds in the wilderness. Others claimed he fled to Canada or California. Occasionally, Sarah would wake in the night, certain she heard footsteps outside, but it was always just the wind or a wandering deer. Eventually, the fear faded. Jake Stone became a ghost, terrifying only in memory. In the spring of 1888, 5 years after Michael's birth, Sarah stood in the garden watching her son play. He was nearly 5 years old now, tall for his age, with his mother's black hair and his father's gray eyes. He was building something with sticks and stones, his tongue caught between his teeth in concentration. Beside him played his sister Catherine, 3 years old, and small like her grandmother Helen, but fierce like her mother. And in Sarah's arms, nursing contentedly, was their youngest, a daughter born just 2 months prior. They had named her Rosa after Sarah's mother. 3 children, a thriving ranch, a husband who still looked at her as if she hung the moon. Sarah had gone from being rejected 42 times to building a family that would carry forward into generations she would never see. Nate emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He was 45 now, his hair more gray than brown, his face deeply lined by sun and wind. But when he smiled at Sarah, he looked young again. "Father O'Malley is coming up the road," said he wanted to talk about the school. Sarah nodded. For the past year, she and Nate had been working with the church to establish a small school at Thunder Valley Ranch. Sarah would teach reading, writing, and arithmetic to the children of the valley, both white and Apache. It was important to her that children like Michael and Catherine, caught between 2 worlds, had a place where both halves of their heritage were honored. Father O'Malley arrived now in his 70s, moving slowly but still sharp of mind. "Mrs. Brennan, I have good news. The territorial government has approved funding for the school. You will receive a small salary and money for books and supplies. You can open in the fall." Sarah pressed a hand to her heart. "Truly, truly, you have become quite respected in the territory you know. The woman who survived, the woman who built. People want their children to learn from someone like that." That evening, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Sarah and Nate sat on the porch as they had so many times before. The stars were brilliant overhead, undimmed by any distant city lights. Somewhere in the valley, a coyote called, lonely and wild. "Do you ever think about that day at the train station?" Sarah asked. "About what would have happened if you had not been there every day?" "I think about how close I came to walking away. How easy it would have been to tell myself it was not my business." He took her hand. "I think about how different my life would be. How empty. I think about the 42 men who rejected me. I used to hate them. But now I am almost grateful, because if any of them had said yes, I would not have come here. I would not have found you." "Do you think you would do it again?" knowing everything that would happen. The attack, the fear, all of it. Sarah looked at her husband, at the home they had built, at the door behind which their children slept safe and warm. In a heartbeat, 1,000 times over. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead, two people who had found each other against impossible odds and built something that would outlast them both. Epilogue. Thunder Valley Ranch, Montana. September 1920. Sarah Brennan, now 65 years old, sat in her rocking chair on the porch of the expanded ranch house. Her hair was white, her face deeply lined, but her back was still straight and her eyes still sharp. In her lap rested a leather-bound album filled with photographs. Her granddaughter, Catherine's daughter, a girl of 12 named Margaret, sat at her feet. "Tell me again, grandmother, about how you met grandfather." Sarah smiled, her weathered fingers tracing the first photograph in the album. It showed a younger Sarah standing beside Nate on their wedding day, both of them bruised and bandaged, but smiling. "I told you that story 100 times. I want to hear it again." So Sarah told it. The train station, the rejection, Nate's intervention, the work, the trust, the love that grew slowly from shared effort and mutual respect, the attack, the wedding, the children. All of it leaving out only the most intimate details. "And the 42 men who said no," Margaret asked. "Do you still remember them?" "I remember that they said no. I do not remember their faces. They are not important." Sarah tapped the photograph of Nate. "The 43rd man, the one who said yes, he is the only one who matters." Nate had died 2 years prior in the winter of 1918. He had been 87 years old, and he had passed peacefully in his sleep with Sarah holding his hand. She missed him every day. But the grief was gentle now, softened by 48 years of happy memories. Michael, now 37, ran the ranch with his wife and 4 children. Catherine lived in Billings with her husband and 3 daughters. Rosa, the youngest, at 32, had become a teacher like her mother, running a school for Apache children in Arizona. The Thunder Valley School had operated for 28 years, teaching over 200 children, before Sarah finally retired at age 60. Many of those students had gone on to remarkable things: doctors, lawyers, teachers. One had even been elected to the territorial legislature. Sarah's story had spread beyond Montana. Newspapers had written about the giant Apache woman who defended her home and built a school. Books had been published, some accurate, some wildly exaggerated. But Sarah cared little for fame. She cared about the legacy she left, her children, her grandchildren, the students she had taught, the proof that love and determination could overcome any obstacle. Margaret looked up at her grandmother with serious eyes. "Do you think grandfather loved you because you were tall and strong, or despite it?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "Neither. He loved me because I was Sarah. My height, my strength, those were parts of me, but they were not all of me. He saw the whole person, and that is what love should be. Seeing someone completely and choosing them anyway." "I am tall, too," Margaret said quietly. "The tallest girl in my class. The boys say I am too big." Sarah reached down and lifted the girl's chin. "Then those boys are fools, just like the 42 men who rejected me. You listen to me, Margaret. Your body is not a mistake. It is a gift. You will grow strong and capable, and you will do things small women cannot do. And one day you will meet someone who looks at you and sees not a giant, but a miracle. Be patient. He will come." Margaret hugged her grandmother tight. "I love you, grandmother. I love you too, child, more than you know." As the sun set over Thunder Valley Ranch, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Sarah Brennan closed her eyes and let the memories wash over her. The fear and pain and struggle had been real, but so had the joy, so had the love, so had the triumph of building something beautiful from the broken pieces of her early life. She had been told for 27 years that no man would want her, and 42 men had proven that prophecy true. But the 43rd had seen something different, and that had made all the difference. Sarah Whitecloud Brennan had survived. She had loved. She had built a legacy that would echo through generations of children who would never know the shame she had endured. And that was enough, more than enough. It was everything. As darkness fell and the stars emerged one by one, Sarah whispered a prayer in Apache, the language of her father, thanking the spirits for the long and winding road that had brought her home. She had been lost. She had been found. She had been broken. She had been made whole. And now, at the end of her days, she could say with absolute certainty that her life had been worth living. Every moment of pain, every tear shed, every battle fought. All of it had led her here to this porch, to this peace, to this knowledge that she had been loved truly and had loved truly in return. The giant Apache woman that no man wanted had become the woman one good man cherished above all else. And their love had changed the world, one small corner at a time. The end.